So I've been filming the wildlife course with my beautiful, wonderful, talented friend Rachel Sinclair, and it was like the best recording time ever. We got to play with animals, we got to do all kinds of things and go to some wonderful places. No! No! The process of that, me being me, I fell in love with the idea of getting a longer lens. Of course I did. How was this ever going to end in any other way? So that's how I came to buy the Lumix Leica 100-400 f4 to f6.3. I'm looking at the box. Those numbers never stick in my head. Anyway, so let's get into my thoughts. I've had it for a while now. I have tried some wildlife photography in bird hides. I've gone to the zoo. I've done some lunar photography, and I am so in love with this lens. So in love with this lens. It is a delight. Now that I have the 12-35, the 35-100, and the 100-400, I am complete. I have the full focal length sorted. It's cool. As I'm a little bit late to the review table on this particular lens, because it's been out for a while now, I'm going to reiterate what others have said in the sense that the image quality is amazing. It's slightly softer at the full 800mm, or in full frame terms. I keep calling it 800mm because I just keep converting it to full frame terms. At the 400mm point, it is slightly softer, but I still think more than usable. Blooming hell. More than usable. I think it is compact, and I know that's stupid given that it's massive, but comparing that to an 800mm in another brand, you're talking like it's ridiculously better, and it's stabilised, and it's so much cheaper compared to competitors as well. I think it's such a versatile lens for Micro Four Thirds. If we had a full frame 800mm, you wouldn't have your stabilisation. It would probably be another zero on the end of the cost. You'd need to buy a seat on the plane. So I think in the realms of wildlife photography, yes, the 100-400 is certainly compact and very, very versatile. The build quality and weather sealing is out of this world. It's what you would hope from a Leica branded lens, and I love it to bits. There are two niggles I have with the build quality of it. Well, not the quality, just the design, I guess. And then there are some things that I absolutely adore. So, first of all, as other reviewers have mentioned, it's a little bit stiff. There is a lock and unlock mechanism, and yes, I've checked that that's completely unlocked, and it is just a little bit stiff. Compounded with my second slight issue, and it's more user error because I've got tiny child's hands, if you put the bracket on the way that it would traditionally be, I literally can't turn the lens. So I've had to, you either go over the top and look a little bit special, or you can turn the bracket around and move it out of the way as a compromise. So I've had to do that. So if you are cursed with tiny hand syndrome, and you get a stiffer version of this lens in terms of how it moves the zoom, you may have to do the same thing. Small niggle, but definitely worth mentioning. I got it, I was like, right, I'm ready to go. I can't reach the lens. One thing that blew my tiny little mind is the video capabilities of this lens, even at 400mm. Because it's dual stabilised, it's ridiculous. Like, all this stuff that I'm showing is handheld. We can slow it down to 60p to make it a little bit smoother, which is even better. But, straight out of the camera, 24p, it's smooth, it's handheld. I just can't imagine that you could do this easily in a full frame equivalent. There's no way. You'd need a video tripod, and you'd need a crane to keep it up. You'd need a back brace, a crash mat, I don't know. You'd need a lot. Whereas with this, you can just handhold and you get some amazing footage. Couple that with shooting in 4K, and now we can crop in to our 400mm footage, and now we get crazy close to the animals in video. It's just wonderful. I love the bracket that you can turn into portrait mode. So if you're in a hide, or if it's on a tripod and you want to get a portrait photo, you can just undo the thing and move it around. Love that design. Super cool. I also love that you have two lens hoods effectively. If you have one that pops out at the front and then you have one that you screw on. Given the cost of this lens, I'm going to keep both on at all times because I will cry if it breaks. But if for whatever reason I've forgot my lens hood, which happens all the time, you've got one built in. So you've got sort of 2 lens hoods for your shooting pleasure. So for the zoo, I loved it. You could get close to the animals, you can lean it against the glass, you don't have to take a monopod, though sometimes it's probably good that you do. You don't get shifty looks from people, you know, you're not rocking an absolute beast of a lens, you know, it's relatively incognito. I think the quality of the photos are brill. I feel like the depth of field is lovely. For birds, I think it's fantastic, particularly for video as well as photo. Let me talk about background blur, because this is a hill I will die on, ladies and gentlemen. One of the main criticisms for the long lens is, of course, depth of field and bokeh and creamy backgrounds, all that stuff. Right, so if I see a bird photo and the background is just completely green mush, it's great, you've isolated the subject, it looks great, but there's no context. That could be in a studio. If you have a slightly less shallow depth of field and you still get the lovely bokeh and the background's nice, but you get a little bit of context, you might be able to make out that it's a tree or whatever. For my taste, I prefer my wildlife photography to have a little bit more context, and I'm not necessarily after that super, I'm not necessarily after that super creamy, can't see what the hell's going on in the background kind of shallow depth of field. I might just be talking about my backside because I'm jealous, who knows. No, I'm not. I would rather have a bit of context. So for me and my use, the slightly slower 6.3 and the micro four thirds setup is still great. You still get great isolation from the background, you still get a lovely focus around the subject, and I love it. For your bird photography, you do want to get sort of around 1/1000th of a second or so to get the wingspan completely in focus. So if it's a cloudy day or whatever, you might find yourself ramping up the ISO, which of course is never the best thing to do on micro four thirds, but all of the images that I've had so far have been completely usable. Sunrise and sunset, I can see how the f6.3 is going to be a little bit of a pain in the backside, just because we have less light to deal with, and with wildlife innately, you do need to keep the shutter speed up, so you can't compensate in the usual ways. However, if you're shooting a deer or something that is quite still, you could easily get away with lowering your shutter speed because you've got the image stabilization to even it out. If it's a fast-moving animal, you're out of luck. You have to keep your shutter speed up. You can have the best stabilization in the world and it will not help. So, yes, limitations of micro four thirds, but would I lug around a proper 800mm full-frame lens? No. Couldn't afford one, I'd have to sell my car, and it would just be too big and I wouldn't use it. So this is a wonderful compromise in my opinion. For lunar photography, it's the first super telephoto lens that I've ever owned, so I've never had the opportunity to do lunar photography before, and I love it. I've got a separate video, which I don't know if is going to come out before or after this video, but I will link to it once it's out. You can do this handheld with the stabilization as well. And on the Micro Four Nerds Facebook, there have even been astro shots of like people taking photos of Jupiter handheld. Jupiter handheld. I say it a lot, but it does blow my tiny mind. So for astro and for things like that, I think it's a wonderful addition. You know, you might not buy it just to take photos of the moon, but it's something that you could do as well as your animals. And when I'm talking myself into these purchases, I always like to think, oh, you know, I can do X, Y, and Z with this lens. So it's not that I'm throwing several £100s into a project that I don't need to. I have seen on the Facebook group as well that street photographers love this lens because at such a long focal length you can compress whatever you're shooting in a really pleasing way, and I really am excited to try and play with the compression and see if we can come up with some different results with that as well. So, hope you've liked the footage and the videos and the photos and me rambling and talking about my tiny pea-sized brain. If you own this lens, let me know what you think. If you want to own this lens, tell me what you love about it, and I shall see you very soon.